the question for many is, who wrote it? Who's holding that poison pen? Social media abuzz, everyone trying to dissect the wording of this op-ed piece and figure out who is the author. Many Trump insiders as well raising their hands saying, do not look in my direction. I didn't do it. So let's bring in Natasha here in studio. You're looking at that part of the story for us today.
That's right. So the allegations are coming on social media and the denials are also coming on social media. Let's begin with a representative, a spokesperson, a communications director for the vice president, because the vice president has really been named by a number of people as potentially the person who penned that op-ed. We'll get to the why in a second, but let's look at the denial first, where he is saying the vice president puts his name on his op-eds. The New York Times should be ashamed, and so should the person who wrote the false, illogical, and gutless op-ed. Our office is above such amateur acts. Now, this excerpt from the New York Times editorial is the reason why so many people think that, in fact, the vice president wrote it. So there is a reference there to Senator McCain and the example that he said, and there you see highlighted in red the word Lodestar. Now, some had actually thought that that might have been a typo, and why didn't the editors of the New York Times catch that? It's not a typo. It's meant to be Lodestar. That's not a word that you hear very often, except when you're talking about the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, who has repeatedly used that word in print and in speeches and in scripts. And so we have been able to locate this video pack that's circulating on social media that shows you just how many times he uses this word. Let's have a look.
Who continues to be the Lodestar for those of us that the Lodestar of the rulemaking process.
And so vigilance and resolve will be our Lodestar.
That's going to continue to be a Lodestar.
Jack's Lodestar as our Lodestar.
Lodestar.
It really was the Lodestar.
It really was the Lodestar. We don't know who the Lodestar is. We don't know who wrote the op-ed. Mike Pence's office says he did not. And now there's also speculation that perhaps the very specific use of the word Lodestar was used as a misdirection. Everyone look at the vice president, so you don't look at me, and I wrote the op-ed. Who knows? At this stage, we should, of course, also acknowledge that CBC News Network does not know who wrote it. We are reporting on all of the speculation now around who the author might be.
I was just reading that Senator John McCain used to use the word Lodestar, and maybe this was something prior to his passing. Maybe that's another hint in his direction. But there are other names that you've been tracking as well who are being bandied about.
That's right. So I should note also that Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, who's in India right now, has denied that he wrote it. So he's putting himself out of the race. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, many people wondering, maybe he's the one that wrote it because, of course, he would have so much motivation. President Trump has repeatedly gone after him. He's been the subject of discussion around Bob Woodward's new book. Maybe it was him. Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, very ambitious and with lots of information, and at times difficult for her to deal with the kind of tone, particularly on foreign affairs issues with the president. Maybe it's her, maybe it's John Kelly, who's, of course, the chief of staff within the White House, would have access to so much information. But some are speculating that it might even be members of President Trump's family, specifically his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner, of course, top advisors. And you'll read within that op-ed repeated references to we. We are trying to do this. We're trying to make things better. We're trying to protect you Americans from your president. So there's lots of speculation. We're hoping that eventually the person will come forward and say, okay, I wrote it.
Many people think this person will inevitably be unmasked.
They may not have a choice. There's so much pressure right now.
Exactly. All right. More on this to come, Natasha. Thank you for this morning.
You're welcome.